My name is Captain Katie Green, United States Marine Corps. I'm 27 years old. I'm trained to neutralize threats, but I never thought the threat would be my own stepfather, Alistair, beating me to a dislocated shoulder and a concussion on my mother's living room floor. And all because I refused to co-sign a $75,000 loan to salvage his lavish lifestyle. But even that physical pain was nothing compared to the moment I lay there, looking to my mother for help and hearing her say in a cold, flat voice, "You brought this on yourself." What neither my mother nor my stepfather knew was that, as an officer, I have a habit I never break. My phone was silently recording everything. What that recording would later reveal left even Detective Valerius, the lead on the case, absolutely stunned. If you are watching this video, please let me know where you are watching from. In the comments, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear stories of survival and healing. Your support means so much to those of us who are sharing our darkest moments. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, in a family of protectors. But everything changed forever the year I turned 17, when my parents divorced, leaving a void that a monster slipped into. That Sunday evening in Virginia Beach smelled like a trap. The humid, salty air drifting in from the Atlantic should have felt like home, but inside my mother's house, it was thick and suffocating, clinging to the back of my throat. The scent was dominated by the rich, sweet aroma of Memphis-style barbecue ribs, my favorite. My mother, Serafina, had made them just for me. A gesture that in our old life would have been pure love. Tonight, it felt like bait. She moved around the kitchen with a forced cheerfulness, but her eyes, the same shade of blue as my own, kept flickering towards my stepfather, Alistair. He sat at the head of the dining table like a king on a throne of cheap oak, nursing a glass of bourbon and watching me with an unnerving placidity. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, weighted with unspoken intentions. I ate slowly, my senses on high alert, the way they'd taught us at Quantico when entering a potentially hostile space. Every nerve ending screamed that this wasn't a family dinner. It was an ambush. After the plates were cleared, the performance ended. Alistair slid a thick manila folder across the polished wood of the table. It stopped inches from my hand. "Katie girl," he began, his voice coated in that slick, syrupy tone he used when he wanted something. It was a voice that always made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. "The family's hit a bit of a rough patch. Your father just needs you to sign here." I opened the folder. The dense block of legal text swam before my eyes, but I found the key phrases easily enough. Personal loan agreement. Principal borrower. $75,000. A cold dread, sharp and swift, shot down my spine. It was worse than I'd imagined. I looked up, first at him, then at my mother, who was now standing in the doorway to the kitchen, wringing a dish towel in her hands. I took a steadying breath, keeping my voice calm and professional. "Alistair, Mom." "I can't," I said, gently but firmly pushing the folder back toward him. "My security clearance, my career in the Marines, it would be jeopardized. It's a huge financial liability under my name. I can absolutely help you two create a budget, figure out where the money is going, but I cannot sign this." The smile on Alistair's face didn't just fade, it vanished, replaced by a dark, simmering rage. The mask was off. "A budget?" he snarled, the words low and guttural. He slammed his palm down on the table. My half-full glass of iced tea jumped, spilling a brown puddle that crept towards the edge. "Your mother is about to lose this house, and you're talking about a budget? You selfish little brat!" I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. "I think I should go," I stated, my voice level, betraying none of the adrenaline now coursing through me. But as I turned toward the front door, his bulky frame moved to block my path. He was bigger than me, heavier, and reeked of stale bourbon and desperation. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he spat, his face uncomfortably close to mine. "You're just a little girl playing soldier. I'm the man of this house." His words were meant to sting, to diminish me. They did. But the worst was yet to come. He grabbed my arm. My training kicked in. It was pure muscle memory. A sharp parry to break his grip, my body instantly shifting into a defensive stance. But this wasn't a training exercise. This was the chaotic, unpredictable violence of a cornered man. He lunged, not with skill, but with the full force of his weight. We crashed against the small end table by the wall. I heard the splintering crack of wood and the sharp shatter of glass. It was the lone photograph on that table, a picture of my father, Colonel Green, in his dress blues, holding me as a child. The sound of it breaking felt like a crack running through my own heart. He was stronger. He pinned me against the wall, his breath hot and sour on my face. We struggled, a frantic, ugly dance in the dim light of the living room. He twisted my right arm behind my back, pushing it higher and higher. I felt a blinding, white-hot agony erupt in my shoulder, followed by a sickeningly wet pop. A scream ripped from my throat. Before I could even process the pain, his other fist connected with my temple. A flash of white light, then darkness bloomed at the edges of my vision. My legs gave out, and we crumpled to the floor, his weight crushing the air from my lungs. Through the swimming haze of pain, I turned my head. My mother was standing there, just as she had been, framed in the doorway to the kitchen. She had her hands clasped over her mouth, but not in horror. It was a strange, deliberate gesture, as if she were physically holding something in. Mom. The word was a pathetic, breathless croak, a final, desperate plea for the woman who had raised me. She met my gaze. Her blue eyes, once so full of warmth, were now as cold and distant as a winter sky. "You brought this on yourself," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. A clinical observation. "Alistair is under a lot of stress. You shouldn't have provoked him." It wasn't a knife that went into me then. It was an axe. And with those few quiet words, it swung down and severed the very last thread that had ever connected us. Lying on that cold hardwood floor, with the ghost of Alistair's weight still crushing me and my mother's words echoing in the sudden silence, my mind couldn't grasp the how. How could this be happening? But in the quiet moments that followed, a more painful question began to surface. Why? Why would she stand there, a statue carved from ice, and sentence her own daughter? To answer that, I have to go back. Back to a time before Alistair. Back when our house wasn't just a structure, but a home. Before the divorce, my mother, Serafina, was the sun, and our family were the planets orbiting her. Those endless Virginia Beach summers were filled with the sounds of her laughter and the smell of her famous apple pie cooling on the windowsill. She was the kind of woman who could host a backyard barbecue for my father's entire company of Marines on a Saturday, then orchestrate a perfect Sunday brunch the next day without breaking a sweat. Our 3-bedroom house near the Oceana Naval Air Station was always buzzing with life. I remember her sitting at the dining room table late at night, a needle and thread in her hand, meticulously sewing the new rank insignia onto my father's uniforms. She did it with such pride, as if each stitch was a testament to her own contribution. Looking back now, I realize her happiness was always tied to my father's identity. She wasn't just Serafina Green, she was Colonel Green's wife. Her social life revolved around the Officers' Wives Club. Her friendships were with other military spouses. Her entire sense of self was built on that foundation. She was proud of it, and she had every right to be. She lived for that role. But when my father left, he didn't just pack his duffel bags and his service medals. He took her identity with him. Suddenly, our house felt cavernous. The silence was deafening. It was like a perfectly pressed dress uniform with no one inside to give it shape. That's when the silent collapse began. My mother started to withdraw. She stopped going to the club meetings. The phone calls from her friends became less and less frequent until they stopped altogether. She was terrified of what people would say, of the pitying looks she'd get at the grocery store. Her greatest fear was becoming a stereotype. I remember finding her crying in the kitchen one night, clutching a mug of cold coffee. "I don't want to be the sad, divorced woman at the end of the block, Katie," she sobbed. "I just can't bear it." That fear was like an open wound, and Alistair, with the keen senses of a shark, smelled the blood in the water from a mile away. He didn't enter her life as a lover. He came in as a savior. He was a successful defense contractor, Or so he said, with a confident smile and a wallet thick enough to make her forget her anxieties. He promised to take care of her, to give her a life where she would never have to worry again. And he did. He gave my mother back the one thing she craved more than love or companionship: an image. Their life became a carefully curated performance. Dinners at fancy waterfront restaurants in Norfolk. Expensive gifts wrapped in glittering paper. Weekends in the Outer Banks. He reintroduced her to society, but this time, she wasn't Colonel Green's wife. She was the girlfriend of Alistair Finch, the successful businessman. And my mother clung to that new identity like a drowning woman clinging to a life raft. But the price for that raft was her independence. Bit by bit, Alistair took control. First, it was her bank accounts, which he helped her manage. Then, it was her relationships, subtly criticizing her old friends until she stopped seeing them. Soon, he was controlling her thoughts. Whenever my brother Orion or I tried to raise a red flag, she would get defensive. "You don't understand," she'd insist. "Alistair loves me. He provides for me." I'll never forget the one time I saw the mask slip, early on. My mother had bought a new coffee maker, a simple Mr. Coffee, nothing fancy, without consulting him. Alistair didn't yell. He did something much scarier. He walked over to her, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper that cut through the air. "You need to learn to respect the money we have, Serafina." The way he said "we" made it sound like mine. My mother, the woman who once commanded a platoon of Marines' wives, stood there, cried, and apologized profusely. At the time, I thought he was just strict about money. I was young. I didn't understand. Now, I see it for what it was. It was never about the coffee maker. It was about power. He was training her, breaking her will, conditioning her to seek his approval for every little thing. My father used to argue with her sometimes, and I once heard him say, "Serafina, you are so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. Don't let fear run your life." It was a plea back then. Lying on the floor years later, it felt like a prophecy. Alistair had turned my mother into a willing hostage in her own home, so desperate to keep her gilded cage from falling apart that she would do anything, even sacrifice her own daughter, to protect the illusion. I don't know how long I lay on that floor. Seconds, maybe minutes. But with some primal reserve of strength I didn't know I possessed, I pushed myself up. I had to get out. The air in that house was poisoned now, thick with betrayal. Every movement sent a fresh wave of agony shooting through my shoulder, a pain so sharp it felt like 1,000 tiny needles grinding against bone. I staggered to the door and stumbled out into the night. The heavy, humid Virginia air, usually a familiar comfort, felt like a wet blanket trying to smother me. It was hard to breathe. I didn't think about my car keys, my wallet, or my phone. My only thought was escape. I just started walking, putting one foot in front of the other, down a street I'd known my whole life that now felt alien and menacing. The amber glow of the streetlights was hazy, and every long shadow cast by the oak trees looked like a threat lying in wait. I wasn't crying. It felt like the tears had frozen inside my chest, right alongside my heart. There was only one thought, a single lighthouse in the storm of pain and confusion. Orion. I had to get to Orion. My brother's place was a 15-minute drive away. On foot, injured and disoriented, it might as well have been on the moon. I made it 2 blocks before my body started to give out. My head was spinning violently, the world tilting on its axis. A wave of nausea, hot and acidic, rose in my throat from the searing pain in my shoulder. I leaned against a chain-link fence, my legs trembling, ready to collapse right there on the sidewalk. And then, through the fog, a memory surfaced. I was 14 again, running in a downpour. My father was making me run 5 miles as part of my training. I was crying, soaked to the bone, telling him I couldn't do it, that I wanted to quit. He didn't yell. He just ran beside me, his own breath steady, and said the words that would become my creed. "Pain is temporary, Katie. Quitting is forever." That voice, his voice, echoed in my head. It was the jolt I needed. I didn't have the strength to run, but I could keep moving. I pushed off the fence and continued on, using it to steady myself. one shuffling step at a time. This wasn't a walk anymore. It was a mission. My mission was to survive. Left foot, right foot, breathe, repeat. The world narrowed to that simple, grueling rhythm. I don't know how long I walked. Time had lost all meaning. But then I saw it. Through the trees, a soft, welcoming glow. The porch light of Orion's small ranch-style house. It had never looked so much like a sanctuary. I stumbled up the driveway and onto the 3 wooden steps of his porch, my body screaming in protest. Using my good hand, I knocked, a weak, pathetic tapping against the solid wood of the door. I heard hurried footsteps from inside. The lock clicked and the door swung open. There was Orion, dressed in an old fire department t-shirt and plaid pajama pants, his hair a mess from sleep. His face, still soft with drowsiness, transformed in an instant. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by shock. The shock then hardened into a cold, protective fury. A fury I knew wasn't directed at me. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't say, "What happened?" or, "Are you okay?" His eyes, the eyes of a firefighter trained to assess a scene in seconds, took in my bruised face, the unnatural angle of my arm, the way I was swaying on my feet. And then he acted. He said nothing at all as he gently scooped me up into his arms, just as I started to collapse, and carried me inside as if I weighed nothing. Orion carefully set me down on his worn leather sofa. He knelt in front of me, his professional gaze quickly and efficiently assessing the damage. His movements were calm, deliberate, the way they are at the scene of an accident. "I'm calling 911, he said, his voice a bedrock of certainty in my chaotic world. I tried to speak, to form a word, but only a dry rasp came out. He saw the effort and gently placed a finger on my lips, silencing me. "Don't say anything, Katie," he said, his voice softer now, but just as firm. "I'm here now. You're safe." In that moment, suspended between agony and relief, the difference was so stark it took my breath away. My mother, seeing me broken on the floor, had condemned me. "You shouldn't have provoked him." My brother, seeing the same thing, had sheltered me. "You're safe now." One had passed judgment, the other had offered sanctuary. And in the quiet safety of my brother's living room, I finally understood. The family I'd grown up with, the one built on my mother's pride and my father's honor, was dead. It had died tonight on a living room floor covered in shattered glass. But in its place, born from the ashes of that betrayal, a new family had just begun. It was small. It was just the 2 of us. And for now, that was enough. The first thing I registered was the smell. A sterile, sharp, antiseptic scent that instantly cut through the groggy haze in my mind. It was the smell of clean floors and disinfectant wipes, a scent that could only mean one thing: a hospital. I blinked my eyes open, the fluorescent lights above buzzing softly, and the world came into focus as a stark, white room at the Portsmouth Naval Medical Center. The sharp, tearing agony in my shoulder had been tamed by whatever they'd given me, now a deep, throbbing ache. A dull, persistent drumbeat reminding me of the night before. And then I saw him. My brother Orion was slumped in a hard plastic visitor's chair, his head lolled to one side against the wall, fast asleep. His firefighter's uniform from his last shift was folded neatly on the floor beside him. He hadn't even gone home. I shifted slightly in the crisp, starchy hospital sheets, and the small rustle of fabric was enough to wake him. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert, a lifetime of late-night emergency calls having conditioned him to wake at a moment's notice. "Hey, champ," he whispered, his voice thick with sleep but overflowing with an unmistakable, profound relief. He pushed himself out of the uncomfortable chair, stretching his back, and walked over to the bedside table. Without a word, he poured me a glass of water from the plastic pitcher there. There were no probing questions, no demand for an explanation. He didn't ask me to relive it. He just placed the cool glass in my good hand, his fingers brushing against mine, and then rested his other warm, steady hand over my own. In that quiet, shared silence, surrounded by the sterile white walls and the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I finally felt safe. safer than I had felt in my own mother's house for the last 5 years. A few hours later, after a doctor had come in to explain my injuries, a grade 3 shoulder separation and a moderate concussion, another visitor arrived. My commanding officer, Major Evans, filled the doorway. He was a quintessential Marine. Tough, no nonsense, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by years of service, but with surprisingly kind, intelligent eyes. He wasn't carrying flowers or a gift basket. That wasn't his style. Instead, he held 2 styrofoam cups of steaming, notoriously bad vending machine coffee, one of which he extended to me. "Heard you had a loud evening, Captain," he said, his tone dry and understated as I took the cup. "Your chain of command has been notified. Your first and only priority right now is to recover. Everything else, we got it." That was it. No prying questions about the circumstances, no judgment, no offer of hollow pity. He simply stated a fact. I was one of his Marines, and the Corps takes care of its own. He was confirming that the institution I had dedicated my life to was now wrapping its arms around me. His words, direct and devoid of sentimentality, were more powerful than any pain medication they could have given me. They were an anchor in a storm that had ripped me from everything I thought I knew. Later that same day, Detective Valerius from the Virginia Beach Police Department arrived. He was a middle-aged man with tired lines etched around his eyes. But the eyes themselves were sharp and missed nothing. He introduced himself, his voice gentle despite his weary appearance, and asked if I was able to talk. And for a moment, I hesitated. My whole body went rigid. A small, foolish part of me, the part that still remembered the mother who baked apple pies and meticulously sewed my father's rank insignia onto his uniforms, cried out in protest. It wanted to protect her. To say it was an accident, a misunderstanding. To swallow the ugly truth to save her from the consequences of her choices, just as I had been doing for years. Orion, still sitting vigil by my side, must have sensed my internal conflict, because his hand found mine and squeezed, a silent, unyielding message of support. Across the room, Major Evans, who had quietly returned to check on something, stood with his arms crossed, a quiet, unmovable presence in the corner. He wasn't there to interfere, but to witness. To make sure his Marine was heard and treated with respect. Looking from my brother's steadfast face to my commanding officer's silent strength, I knew what I had to do. Major Evans had once told a group of us young officers something that came back to me then with stunning clarity. "Marines," he'd said during a briefing, "your oath is to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Sometimes the domestic ones are closer than you think. Your only guide in those moments is to do the right thing, no matter the cost." I took a deep, shuddering breath. "It started over a loan," I began, and I told Detective Valerius everything. The whole ugly, painful, humiliating truth. When I was done, my voice hoarse, I pointed to my phone, which was sitting in a clear evidence bag on the rolling table. "I recorded it," I said, my voice finally clear and steady. "The whole thing." The weariness on Detective Valerius's face evaporated, replaced by a look of intense, focused interest. He nodded slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. "Captain Green," he said, a new respect in his tone, "I think you just made this case." After the detective left with my statement and the phone, Major Evans walked over to my bedside. He looked down at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something beyond professional concern in his eyes. It was a deep, profound respect. "Good work, Green," he said simply. "You did what a Marine officer does. You faced the truth, no matter how hard it was. Now get some rest. You're not in this fight alone." He paused at the door before leaving, turning back one last time. The support from my brother and my commanding officer in that sterile room was the first real light I'd seen in the darkness. It makes me wonder about the unexpected saviors in our own lives. If you've ever had a Major Evans or an Orion, someone who showed up for you when family didn't, please support this story with a like and comment with the word guardian to honor them. He gave a slight nod. Semper Fi. Semper Fi, always faithful. The motto of my corps, words I had lived by since I took my oath at 17. It had never meant more to me than it did in that sterile hospital room. My family by blood had betrayed me, but my family in olive drab, my brothers and sisters in the United States Marine Corps, they were here. They were holding the line. They were keeping their oath when others had broken theirs. A few days after I was discharged from the hospital, the fragile sense of peace I had found began to feel real. I was staying in Orion's spare bedroom, and the quiet rhythm of his apartment was a balm to my frayed nerves. The days settled into a routine of gentle physical therapy exercises for my shoulder, long naps, and the comforting, mindless distraction of daytime television. I was starting to feel the ground beneath my feet again. Then, the past called. Literally. An unknown number flashed on my screen. I hesitated, then answered. It was my mother. Her voice was a trembling, tear-choked whisper. "Katie, honey, I'm so sorry. I was so scared." For one stupid, naive second, a tiny flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe she gets it now, I thought. Maybe she's finally woken up. That hope was a fool's errand. "Alistair's been arrested, baby," she sobbed. "They're holding him. You have to help me. You're our only hope." And just like that, the flicker of hope was extinguished, leaving behind a cold, bitter ash. I understood with sickening clarity. She wasn't calling to apologize to me. She was calling to get me to save him. A wave of nausea, acrid and hot, rose in my throat. It tasted like betrayal. What she didn't know was that just before her call, I'd had another visitor. Detective Valerius had stopped by Orion's apartment. He didn't come empty-handed. He placed a thick file on the coffee table between us. "Captain," he said, his tired eyes holding a new, grim light. "It's worse than you thought." He opened the file and showed me the evidence. Bank statements, credit card applications. Alistair hadn't just been planning to use my good credit for a loan. He'd already been using my identity. He'd taken my social security number and other personal information and opened 3 separate credit cards in my name. He had maxed every single one of them out, racking up over $20,000 in debt. "This isn't just an assault case anymore," Valerius explained, his voice grim. "This is felony identity theft and fraud. If it's not handled, it could completely destroy your credit score and, as you know, threaten your security clearance." The feeling of being physically attacked was one thing. This was different. This was a cold, calculated, systematic plan to dismantle my life. It was a violation on a level I couldn't have imagined. I wasn't just a casualty of his desperation. I was a target. My mother was still crying on the other end of the phone, a performance of practiced hysterics. I took a breath, my voice dangerously calm, and told her what the police had just discovered. I told her about the credit cards, the debt, the identity theft. I expected shock, maybe a moment of horrified silence, even a flicker of anger on my behalf. I got none of it. "Oh, honey, that's just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice instantly shifting from sorrowful to dismissive. "He was just trying to make ends meet for us. He was going to pay it all back." She took a breath and then delivered the payload. Could you just tell the police you gave him permission?" "For me? If you don't drop the charges, they'll send him to prison. His life will be over. Do you really want that to happen to the man who's been taking care of your mother?" It was then that I remembered something a psych instructor at Quantico once told us. Master manipulators don't use weapons. They use your own love and sense of duty against you. She wasn't asking for my help. She was giving me an order, using our shared history as a weapon of emotional blackmail. She was holding our entire mother-daughter relationship hostage in exchange for a lie that would exonerate her abuser and implicate me. No. The word came out of me, cold and hard as steel. It was a single, clean sound in the chaos of her manufactured grief. "I will not lie to protect a criminal," I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "He assaulted me, he stole from me, and you stood there and watched." The other end of the line went silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, the fake tears were gone, replaced by a venomous chill that was far more honest. "You are so selfish, Katie. Just like your father," she hissed. always putting your precious principles and your career before this family. You will regret this." Then, a sharp click. She had hung up. The last lingering ember of hope that I could somehow salvage a relationship with my mother died in that moment. There was nothing left but the stark, unvarnished truth. I was in a war I never asked for, and my own mother had just declared, unequivocally, which side she was on. The final straw wasn't a shout. It wasn't another threat or a tearful, manipulative plea. It was a calm, professional phone call that chilled me to the bone. A calculated strike that landed with devastating precision. It came the day after my conversation with my mother. From a number I recognized immediately as my direct line at the base. Major Evans. "Green," he said, and the usual undercurrent of warmth in his voice was gone, replaced by a formal, unreadable seriousness that immediately put every nerve in my body on high alert. "I've just had a very interesting conversation with your mother." I went completely still, the air leaving my lungs in a silent rush. A cold dread, far worse than anything I'd felt before, washed over me. This was a line I never imagined would be crossed. "She seems to be under the impression," he continued, his voice carefully neutral, each word deliberately spaced, "that you have a history of emotional instability. She claims that you have issues with aggression, and that you were, in fact, the one who assaulted Mr. Finch first after he refused to give you money." I was speechless, utterly paralyzed. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. It was one thing to be abandoned in a moment of crisis. It was another to be manipulated for the sake of an abuser. But this was a scorched earth declaration of war. They weren't just trying to get Alistair off the hook anymore. They were actively, maliciously trying to destroy me. They were aiming a torpedo at the very foundation of my life, the one thing I had built for myself, piece by painful piece, away from the dysfunction of that house, my career and my honor as a United States Marine. They wanted to flip the script, to twist reality so completely that the victim became the perpetrator. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It felt like a tectonic plate grinding into place. The grief, the confusion, the deep, aching hurt. It was all consumed by a sudden volcanic eruption of rage. It wasn't a chaotic, messy anger. It was a pure, hot, clarifying rage that burned away every last shred of doubt and sentimentality. The enemy was no longer a vague concept. She had a name and a voice. The moment I hung up with Major Evans, my hands moving with an eerie calm, I dialed my mother's number. There were no more tears left in me. There was no more conflict, no more filial duty warring with self-preservation. There was only the cold, precise focus of a soldier before an engagement. She answered on the second ring, her voice wary. "Katie." "You called my commanding officer," I said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, an indictment. She immediately started to stammer, the facade of the concerned mother crumbling into the pathetic defense of a co-conspirator. "I was just trying to help, honey. Their lawyer said it was the only way to make this all go away." "Help?" I cut her off, my voice sharp as broken glass, devoid of the warmth she had known her whole life. "You call that helping? Let me be perfectly clear. You called my CO to slander my name, to lie about my mental state, and to potentially end my career. You are actively trying to ruin my life to save the man who beat me unconscious and stole my identity. Do you even hear the words coming out of your mouth?" The other end of the line was silent. A thick, damning silence that was all the answer I needed. She heard them. She just didn't care. "Listen to me very carefully," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, steady tone that left no room for negotiation or future appeals to emotion. "From this moment forward, you and I are done. I am no longer your daughter. You have made your choice, and now I am making mine. Any future communication between us will be through my lawyer. The game is over." I ended the call before she could respond. I didn't slam the phone down in anger. I placed it calmly on the counter. And in the silence that followed, I didn't feel the crushing sadness I expected. I felt free, utterly and completely liberated. The immense, soul-crushing weight of trying to love someone who was incapable of loving me back, of trying to maintain a relationship with my own poison had vanished. I walked into the bathroom and looked at my reflection in the mirror. A woman stared back at me, a faint yellow-green bruise still visible on her temple, her right arm still immobilized in a sling. But her eyes? Her eyes were different. The hurt, the confusion, the pleading look was gone. In its place, a fire was burning. For years, I had ignored my gut feeling about Alistair. For years, I had made excuses for my mother's weakness. I had just finished rereading a book from the Commandant's reading list, Gavin de Becker's The Gift of Fear, a book that preaches the importance of listening to your intuition as a survival tool. I realized I had been silencing mine for far too long, out of a misplaced sense of family loyalty. Never again. I took an oath to protect my country from all enemies, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten the most fundamental oath of all, the one you make to yourself, to protect your own safety, your own sanity, your own honor. That night, I made a new vow, a silent promise to the reflection in the mirror. I would not be silent. I would not retreat. I would fight this battle. That moment of choosing to fight for yourself is one of the most powerful experiences a person can have. If you've ever reached a point where you had to draw a final line in the sand to protect yourself, please show your support with a like and comment with the words, "line drawn," to let me know I'm not alone in this fight. The power had shifted. The control she and Alistair thought they had was an illusion, and it had just been shattered. I picked up my phone again, my fingers steady, and called the one person I knew would understand the shift in strategy. Orion answered immediately. "Katie, what's wrong?" "I need a good lawyer," I said, my voice clear and resolved. "And I don't mean a good one. I mean a shark. Someone who doesn't just defend, someone who attacks." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. He heard the steel in my voice. "I know a guy," was all he said. That phone call changed everything. The victim narrative they had tried to force upon me was dead. I was no longer a pawn in their desperate game. I was seizing the pen, becoming the author of my own story. The legal battle ahead would be brutal. I knew that. It would be messy and painful. But for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The man Orion knew was named Ben Carter, a former JAG prosecutor whose private practice was located in a sleek downtown Norfolk high-rise overlooking the Elizabeth River. He was nothing like the slick, fast-talking lawyers I'd seen on TV. His office was organized with military precision, books perfectly aligned on the shelves, not a stray paper in sight. It looked like a commanding officer's quarters. Ben was in his late 50s, with a firm handshake and eyes that held the quiet intensity of a man who had seen combat. He was an old friend of my father's. "Marcus pulled me out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah," Ben said, his grip on my hand solid and reassuring. "He saved my life. It's about time I started to repay that debt." For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a true, strategic ally. I sat across from his large mahogany desk and laid out the entire situation, my voice steady and factual, just as if I were giving a mission briefing. I told him everything: the loan, the assault, the identity theft, and the final, unforgivable act: my mother's call to Major Evans. Then I slid my phone across the desk. "This is the recording from that night," I said. Ben plugged a pair of headphones into the phone and listened, his face an unreadable, stoic mask. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He just absorbed the information. When the recording ended with the chilling finality of my mother's voice, he carefully removed the headphones, set the phone down, and looked me straight in the eye. "We have more than enough," he said, his voice calm and decisive. "Now, we draw up a battle plan." From that day forward, we operated like a two-person tactical unit. My new mission became applying the principles of warfare to my own life. It was my OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. Ben handled the complex legal filings and strategies, while I, with Orion's help, focused on gathering intel. We compiled every piece of evidence we could find: bank statements that clearly showed the fraudulent charges, the official credit reports from Equifax and TransUnion that documented the identity theft, the detailed medical reports from the Naval Hospital, The graphic, ugly photos Orion had taken of my bruises and swollen face the night of the attack. Orion even managed to track down a couple of former neighbors who had moved away to escape Alistair's increasingly erratic behavior. They were willing to testify about his temper, his heavy drinking, and the unsettling way he spoke to my mother when he thought no one was listening. Each piece of evidence felt like loading another round into a magazine. But the recording from that night, that was our silver bullet. The audio was horrifyingly clear. Alistair's snarling rage, the crash of my father's picture frame shattering, my own cry of pain. And worst of all, my mother's cold, detached voice delivering the verdict. You brought this on yourself. It was the kind of evidence that left no room for interpretation. A week later, Ben called me. Katie, are you sitting down? He asked. He had hired a private investigator to do a deep dive into Alistair Finch's past. It turned out the successful defense contractor persona was a complete fabrication. He had been fired from his last legitimate job for expense fraud, but the real bombshell was what the investigator found in Arizona. Alistair had an outstanding felony warrant for financial fraud against the elderly. He had conned a 70-year-old widow out of her life savings. He's a serial predator, Katie, Ben said, his voice devoid of any softness. And your mother was just his latest mark. The news was both sickening and, in a strange way, liberating. It obliterated any lingering, microscopic shred of doubt I might have had. This wasn't a good man who had made a terrible mistake under pressure. This was a professional criminal who preyed on vulnerable women, and my mother had willingly handed him the keys to her life, and tried to hand him the keys to mine. He had to be stopped. I was going to be the one to stop him. As the preliminary court date approached, their side blinked. Alistair's lawyer offered a plea deal. He would plead guilty to misdemeanor assault if I agreed to drop all the felony fraud and identity theft charges. The offer was a joke, an insult. But then my mother called, her voice choked with manufactured tears, begging me to accept it. Think of the family, Katie. This will tear us apart, she cried. What family? I responded, my voice as cold as ice. The family ended the night you stood by and watched your daughter get beaten. There is no deal. We're going to trial. After I hung up, the weight of that decision settled on me. This meant my mother would have to be exposed in court. That recording would be played. Her betrayal would become public record. I talked it over with my therapist, Dr. Sharma, a woman whose calm wisdom had been a lifeline. She looked at me and said, Katie, sometimes confronting your abuser in court isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming your own narrative. It's about taking the story they tried to write for you and telling it, in your own words, in a place where the truth matters more than their lies. And she was right. This wasn't just about putting Alistair behind bars anymore. This was about taking back my own story. This was about ensuring my voice, the one they had tried so hard to silence, would be the one that was finally heard. The Virginia Beach Circuit courtroom was cold, formal, and utterly silent. A sterile environment designed to strip away emotion and leave only facts. The air hummed with a tense anticipation that felt heavier and more suffocating than the humid summer air outside. Before walking in, I had paused in the marbled hallway, my hand resting on the military ID card in my wallet. The words, United States Marine Corps, stared back at me in bold black print. They weren't just words. They were a promise I had made to my country and to myself. They were a reminder of who I was, what I had sworn to uphold. Honor, courage, commitment. Today, in this arena so different from any battlefield I had trained for, all three would be tested. I walked through the double doors and into that courtroom wearing my Service A uniform. The iconic olive green jacket and khaki skirt, my ribbons and medals perfectly aligned over my left breast pocket. It wasn't a tactic Ben had devised. It was a statement. It was my armor, a tangible representation of the discipline, integrity, and strength they had tried to break. This was who I was, and I would not let them take that from me. Across the room, at the defendant's table, sat Alistair. He looked haggard and pathetic in a cheap, off-the-rack suit that seemed a size too big for his suddenly shrunken frame. Stripped of his blustering household rage, he looked smaller, weaker. In the front row of the gallery, seated directly behind him like a silent, complicit shadow, was my mother. She looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her, her face a pale, drawn mask of anxiety. Her hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She refused to meet my eyes, staring intently at a fixed point on the far wall. The battle began. Alistair's lawyer, a man with a slick smile and the predatory eyes of a shark, did his best to dismantle me on the stand. He brought up my military training, not as a point of pride, but as a weapon against me. He twisted my service into a portrait of a volatile, aggressive soldier, peppering his questions with insinuations about undiagnosed PTSD. He painted a picture of a woman, trained in violence, who had overreacted to a simple family disagreement about money. He tried to provoke me, to bait me, to make me fit the unhinged caricature he was creating for the jury. But I held my ground. Anchored by the truth and the rigid discipline of my training, I answered every question calmly, factually, my voice never wavering. I stuck to the facts. The truth was my weapon and my shield. Then it was Ben Carter's turn. He rose, and his quiet, commanding presence seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He didn't question me further. He had already established the facts of the assault. Instead, he turned his attention to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice resonating with an authority that brooked no argument, "the prosecution would like to play an audio recording into evidence, People's Exhibit A." A ripple of interest went through the courtroom. The judge nodded. A court clerk took my phone, which had been held in evidence, and connected it to the courtroom's speaker system. The low hum of the air conditioning was the only sound as the room fell utterly silent. Ben pressed play. Alistair's voice, thick with contempt and bourbon, suddenly filled the space, as raw and ugly as it had been that night. "Just a little girl playing soldier." The sound of the end table splintering. The sharp, sickening shatter of glass as my father's picture frame hit the floor. My own muffled cry of pain as my shoulder gave way. And then, the climax. A moment of charged silence, followed by my mother's voice, chillingly clear, broadcast for all to hear. "You brought this on yourself." I risked a glance at her. I watched as my mother physically recoiled in her seat, cringing as her own cold, damning words echoed in the silent room. Her betrayal was no longer a private wound. It was a public record. Alistair went pale, his face the color of ash, his eyes wide with the terror of being truly seen for the first time. Across the room, I saw the faces of the jury members. Their expressions, once carefully neutral, shifted into a collective mask of undisguised disgust. They weren't just looking at him anymore, they were staring through him. The game was over. We all knew it. But Ben wasn't finished. He let that damning silence hang in the air for a moment longer before speaking again. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls a surprise rebuttal witness to the stand, Mrs. Margaret Davies from Scottsdale, Arizona." Alistair's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. We were not notified of this witness. She is a rebuttal witness to the defendant's character, which you yourself put into question when you painted him as a stressed-out family man, counsel," the judge replied dryly. "Overruled. Bailiff, please bring in the witness." The heavy courtroom doors opened, and a small, elderly woman walked in. She was maybe 5 feet tall, with a neat crown of silver hair and a frail frame, but she walked with a spine of steel and an unshakable resolve in her eyes. It was the widow Alistair had conned out of her life savings. He stared at her, his mouth agape, as if he were seeing a ghost risen from the grave of his past sins. His lawyer knew what her testimony would mean. Facing the prospect of a jury hearing the detailed, heartbreaking account of his previous crimes on top of the mountain of evidence against him now, his potential sentence would skyrocket. 15, maybe 20 years. Alistair completely fell apart, his bravado dissolving into pathetic, panicked whimpers. His lawyer frantically requested a recess. 10 minutes later, they returned. Alistair, his face streaked with tears, his voice trembling and broken, pleaded guilty to all charges. Assault, grand larceny, felony identity theft, everything. Before the judge delivered the sentence, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. I stood, my back straight, my uniform a symbol of the order and honor they had tried to desecrate. I did not look at Alistair. I did not look at my mother. I looked directly at the judge, at the American flag standing proudly behind him. Your Honor, I began, my voice clear and strong. I am a captain in the United States Marine Corps. I took an oath to defend this country against all enemies. But they never train you for the enemy who sleeps in your mother's bed, the one who sits at your dinner table. This case was never about the money. It was about a profound betrayal of trust. It was about a man who attacked a woman and the mother who stood by and let it happen. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle in the silent room. I do not stand here today as a victim. I stand here as a survivor. And I stand here as a reminder to everyone in this room that honor, courage, and truth are more powerful than lies and manipulation. They matter. And they will always, always prevail. The judge's gavel came down with a final, definitive crack. Alistair was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Justice had been served. The battle was over. So, now what? As I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding Virginia sun, I didn't feel the triumphant elation I had expected. There was no surge of victory. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness. A bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the trial and everything to do with the war I had just survived. Victory, I was discovering, had a bitter aftertaste. Orion drove me back to his apartment in a comfortable silence, sensing I didn't have the words or the energy to speak. That night, I sat alone in his guest room, staring out the window at the distant lights of the city. I had won. I had exposed the lies, reclaimed my story, and put a predator behind bars. But in the process, I had lost something irreplaceable. I had lost the mother I once knew, the ghost of a woman who baked apple pies and laughed in the summer sun. And that truth, in the quiet aftermath of the storm, hurt more than any physical wound. A few weeks later, my mother requested to see me. She wanted to meet at a neutral location, a small generic coffee shop halfway between Orion's apartment and her now half-empty house. I agreed, knowing it had to be the last time. She looked frail and exhausted, the years of stress and denial having finally caught up to her. She cried as soon as I sat down, her apology a torrent of broken words and self-pity. She was sorry, she was wrong, she was just so scared. But even in her apology, the excuses were woven through. I was so lonely after your father left, Katie, she whispered, twisting a paper napkin into shreds. I just wanted someone to take care of me. I didn't want to be alone. I listened patiently, without interruption. I let her say everything she needed to say. When she finally fell silent, sniffing back tears, I looked her directly in the eye, not with anger, but with a sad, quiet finality. I love the memory of the mother you used to be, I said, my voice calm and steady. I will always love her. But I cannot have the woman sitting in front of me now in my life. I need to be safe. I need to heal. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and laid it on the table to cover our coffees. I wish you peace, Mom. And then I stood up and walked away. That was the last time we ever spoke. The days that followed were a struggle. A relentless wave of guilt crashed over me. Had I been too cruel? Too unforgiving? Was it my place to abandon her when she was at her lowest? The questions haunted me, turning my victory into a source of torment. It was my therapist, Dr. Sharma, who helped me find my bearings. Katie, she said during one of our sessions, you are not responsible for your mother's happiness. You are only responsible for your own safety and well-being. She helped me understand that the forgiveness I so desperately needed wasn't for my mother, but for myself. Forgiveness for not seeing the danger sooner. Forgiveness for ignoring the red flags. Forgiveness for believing in the illusion of a happy family long after it had crumbled into dust. She quoted the theologian Reinhold Niebuhr to me, the words of the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I couldn't change my mother, but I could change how I let her affect me. Forgiveness, I learned, wasn't an emotion. It was a decision. It was the decision to let go of the weight of anger and resentment, not for their sake, but for mine. One evening, about a month after the trial, Orion came home from his shift carrying a cardboard box with small air holes punched in the side. He set it on the living room floor with a grin. "Every soldier needs a loyal battle buddy," he said. I knelt and peered inside. A tiny, trembling ball of golden fluff with big, brown, soulful eyes stared back at me. It was a golden retriever puppy from a local animal shelter. "He needed a home," Orion said, "and I figured you needed someone to protect." I lifted the puppy out of the box, and he immediately began licking my face, his tail a blur of pure, unadulterated joy. I named him Justice. Justice didn't care about my past, my scars, or the complexities of my broken family. He only knew that I was his entire world. In the weeks that followed, taking care of him became my new mission. Our morning walks along the Virginia Beach coastline, watching him chase the waves with boundless enthusiasm, began to heal parts of me I didn't even know were broken. He taught me about unconditional love, about finding joy in the simplest moments. He filled the suffocating silence in my life with the happy sounds of his playful barks and the constant rhythmic thump of his tail against the floor. He was the beginning of a new life. He was my peace. 5 years have passed since that final courtroom gavel. And in those 5 years, I haven't just recovered. I have rebuilt. My shoulder healed stronger than before, a network of scar tissue reminding me of its resilience. I didn't just meet the rigorous standards of the Marine Corps physical fitness test. I excelled, scoring higher than I ever had before. I was promoted to major. But the most significant changes weren't the ones you could see. They were internal. The faint scar on my temple has faded to a barely visible silver line, but I see it every morning in the mirror. It's no longer a reminder of the pain, but of the strength it took to survive. I learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness to be hidden. It is the quiet, courageous heart of true strength. I didn't bury my story in the past. I sharpened it into a tool. 2 years ago, I spearheaded a new initiative within the Marine Corps, a program I named the Home Front. It's designed to provide awareness, resources, and confidential support for service members who are victims of domestic violence and financial abuse, the unseen battles fought far from any foreign shore. Last month, I stood as a guest speaker on a stage at Quantico in front of hundreds of young officers, men and women alike. I told them my story. I talked about recognizing non-traditional threats, about the strategic importance of personal boundaries, and about the courage it takes to ask for help. I told them that seeking support isn't a sign of weakness. It's a strategic maneuver to protect your most valuable asset, yourself. My legacy would not be what was done to me, but what I chose to build from the wreckage. My life is here, still in Virginia Beach. I have a small apartment overlooking the ocean, where I can watch the dolphins play in the surf in the early morning light. Every day begins the same way, with a run on the beach alongside Justice, who is no longer a trembling ball of fluff, but a magnificent, goofy, 80-pound golden retriever. He is my constant companion, my furry shadow. My real family is thriving. Orion married a wonderful woman, a nurse named Sarah, and they have a beautiful little girl, Lily, who has me wrapped around her tiny finger. I am now Aunt Katie, a title I wear with more pride than any military rank. Being an aunt means I get to spoil her with ice cream, teach her how to build the best sandcastles, and be the fun one who always says yes. It's a kind of love that is pure and uncomplicated, a balm to an old wound. I keep in regular contact with my father, our relationship stronger and more honest than ever before. Occasionally, through a distant relative, I hear news of my mother. She moved out of state a few years ago, shortly after Alistair was released from prison on parole. I'm told she never reconnected with him. When I hear her name now, I don't feel the hot sting of anger or the cold ache of betrayal anymore. There's just a faint, distant sadness for the woman she could have been, for the relationship we might have had. I hope she's found some measure of peace, wherever she is. This afternoon, as the sun begins its slow descent over the Atlantic, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and gold, I stand on the wet sand at the edge of the water. I throw a tennis ball, and Justice bounds after it, his entire body a perfect expression of pure joy. Watching him, I have a moment of profound clarity. I realize that happiness isn't the absence of scars. Happiness is the ability to look at your scars and see the journey you survived to earn them. It's the quiet strength you find in the life you build for yourself after the old one has burned to the ground. My real family isn't defined by blood, but by loyalty. It's Orion, who carried me when I couldn't walk. It's Ben Carter, who fought for me because of a debt owed to my father. It's Major Evans and the Marine Corps, who stood by me without question. It's Justice, whose love is the most honest thing I've ever known. The oath a Marine takes is to protect our nation from enemies, foreign and domestic. But the most important oath, the one that truly defines us, is the one we must make to ourselves. To protect our own integrity, our own honor, and our own well-being from the threats that come from within, and from those closest to us. To face the truth with the same courage we would face the enemy. That is the vow I will honor for the rest of my life. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. First and foremost, to myself. Thank you for listening to my story. The journey from that living room floor to this peaceful beach has been a long one, but sharing it with you has been a powerful part of my healing. It's a reminder that none of us are ever truly alone in our battles. If my story of survival and rebuilding has resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribe for more stories of strength and resilience. Your support helps create a community where every voice can be heard and every survivor knows they are believed. Let me know in the comments one word that describes how you feel right now. Thank you for being a part of my final chapter.